James Taylor, a man who never loses, placed his bet on a game unlike any he had ever played. Married to a woman society wouldn't call perfect, Emily Foster, a woman not only strong, but capable of breaking every mold of dependence. 6 months, $1 million, and one big question. Who will change whom? Will money, power, and control prevail? Or will the power of freedom and self-respect rise above? This journey is not just about a bet. It's about discovering what truly defines the worth of a person. The story begins. James Taylor, a wealthy and arrogant man, agreed to a bet that would change his life in ways he never imagined. Accustomed to winning in both work and life, competition was his driving force. But when his close friend Mark presented a bold challenge at an extravagant Los Angeles party, James couldn't resist his curiosity. With a smirk, Mark threw down the gauntlet. "Let's see if you have the guts to do this, James. I bet you wouldn't dare marry a woman who's not like the ones you usually go for." James, known for dating beautiful women, was momentarily surprised, but still brimming with confidence. He raised an eyebrow and asked, "What's the prize?" With a mischievous smile, Mark lifted his champagne glass and said, $1 million for the winner, but you have to marry her and keep the marriage intact for at least 6 months. Excited by the challenge and the financial stakes, James agreed without hesitation. The woman Mark had in mind was Emily Foster, a woman who didn't fit conventional beauty standards. James didn't know her, but to him it was just another business deal to win. A few days later, James received more details about Emily. She was confident, independent, and tough, completely different from the women he usually encountered. This only piqued his curiosity further. Used to controlling everything, he wondered how he would handle a woman who wouldn't easily be subdued. Their first meeting took place at a luxurious restaurant. As Emily entered, James immediately noticed she was unlike any woman he had ever met. She wasn't intimidated by the extravagant surroundings or his presence. On the contrary, she looked him straight in the eye with unwavering confidence. "You must be James Taylor," Emily said directly as she sat down. "And you must be Emily Foster," James responded with a calm smile, extending his hand. She hesitated briefly before shaking his hand firmly, showing her determination. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Emily began, her tone calm. "I know why we're here. I know about the bet, the conditions, and the terms." James was slightly taken aback by her directness, but he kept his composure. "So, you still agreed to meet me?" he asked, curious about her reasons. Emily paused a moment before responding, "I have my own reasons. I'm not naive. 6 months may seem short, but a lot can change in that time. If you think you can control or manipulate me, you're wrong." James smiled. Emily was proving to be a bigger challenge than he had expected, which only made him more intrigued. The meeting ended, but James found himself increasingly drawn to Emily. Emily. She wasn't like anyone he'd met before. She wasn't afraid of him, and that both fascinated and intrigued him. As time passed, James continued to think about his next move. He was used to being the one who controlled the game, but now it seemed Emily had her own tricks up her sleeve. Their second meeting took place at a simple cafe, a far cry from the fancy restaurants James was accustomed to. Emily had suggested this spot, and James, curious, agreed. He wanted to understand more about her and why she would agree to a marriage that seemed like nothing more than a temporary contract. When James arrived, Emily was already there, sipping tea with a gentle smile. She greeted him warmly, no longer the cold figure from their first encounter, but still maintaining that unshakable confidence. "I thought you preferred 5-star restaurants," Emily teased as James sat down. "Sometimes it's not bad to change things up," James replied, trying to appear relaxed, despite feeling a little out of place in the simple setting. They chatted for a while, exchanging small talk, but Emily quickly got to the point. "If we're really going to do this, I want to make a few things clear," Emily said, setting her teacup down. "I don't care about your money or your lavish lifestyle. 6 months is 6 months, and I plan to leave after that time, just as I came in." James looked at her intently. He knew she was speaking the truth. Emily was the type of woman who knew exactly what she wanted, and clearly, marriage wasn't a way for her to climb the social ladder like others might assume. "So, what do you want?" James asked, genuinely curious. "Freedom," Emily answered, without hesitation. "I want you to understand that while we're entering into this arrangement, I will not be controlled by you. I have my own life, and that won't change just because of a temporary marriage." James smiled. It wasn't the answer he had expected, but at the same time, he didn't mind giving Emily that freedom. To him, marriage was just a formality to win a bet. If she wanted to maintain her independence, he wouldn't care. "All right," James agreed. 6 months from now, we'll go our separate ways." Emily studied him for a moment, almost as if she needed to be sure that he truly agreed to the conditions she had laid out. She had accepted the challenge with a plan in mind and a determination to ensure things went her way. Deep down, she knew James might try to manipulate the situation, but she also trusted her own strength to resist his influence. The meeting ended on peaceful terms, and they both left with their roles clearly defined. Emily would maintain her independence, while James would ensure the marriage remained just a formality. But as time passed and the wedding day neared, James couldn't help but feel that this game might not be as simple as he had thought. The wedding was cold, devoid of any grandeur, almost like a well-organized business transaction. James Taylor, with his strategic mindset, saw himself as the winner of the bet. He was certain that 6 months would pass quickly, and Emily, no matter how tough she was, would eventually surrender to the lavish lifestyle he was prepared to offer her. Right after the wedding, James took Emily to his sprawling penthouse in downtown Chicago, a symbol of his wealth. The huge glass windows reflected the city lights, and the interiors were filled with expensive, exclusive decor. To him, this was the real battleground, the place where he would conquer Emily with the power of material wealth. But as soon as they arrived, Emily made it clear that she was not easily subdued. She stepped into the penthouse with a cold expression, her gaze not one of admiration, but of challenge. 6 months, no more, she said firmly, walking over to one of the large windows and gazing out at the city without being impressed by the luxury around her. James smiled confidently. He was used to this kind of resistance. Every woman who had entered his life eventually succumbed to his charm and wealth. Emily, he thought, would be no different. In the days following the wedding, James did everything he could to impress her. He gifted her expensive jewelry, designer clothes, and lavish trips, all with the expectation that Emily would begin to adjust to the lifestyle he had planned for her. But to his frustration, she rejected everything. "I don't need these things, James," she said calmly, which only made him more frustrated. For the first time, James, who was accustomed to getting everything he wanted, felt his power tested. This was no longer just a bet, it was personal. He had to do whatever it took to conquer Emily. He needed to prove that, in the end, he was the one in control. And so he began to play more aggressively. He stopped her from working, giving reasons like, "You don't need the salary anymore," or "Your place is as my wife." When Emily strongly opposed, he made her wait for hours just to attend meetings she deemed important. James manipulated the schedule, the situations, everything to maintain control. But Emily didn't give in.
She was like a rock, resisting every one of his attempts, which only fueled his desire to break her. Their relationship began to feel like a minefield. Subtle provocations appeared in their casual conversations where Emily used sharp words that shattered every effort he made.
James tried to make her feel inferior or controlled. One tense evening, he took a more emotional approach. "I don't understand you, Emily," he said, looking at her with a mix of frustration and curiosity. "Any other woman would be thrilled to live in this luxury, but you act like it's nothing. What do you really want?" Emily, until then still cold, finally looked up at him, her eyes flashing with an intensity James had never imagined. "What I want is respect, James. I'm not a pawn in your game. You think you can control me with money, but you're wrong. Money can't buy dignity or integrity. You have all these things around you, but you're empty inside, and that's something you can't stand." Her words landed like a punch to James's stomach. For the first time, he felt that he might lose more than just control. Emily wasn't simply resisting his power. She was dismantling the mask he had meticulously built over the years, and that terrified him. No one had ever dared to challenge him this way, and the fact that Emily could see beyond his wealth made James feel exposed. But instead of backing down, James decided to tighten his grip. He began to plot ways to isolate her, to make her realize that without him, her life would become much more difficult. He severed her connections, closed doors to career opportunities, and even sabotaged key events she had been organizing. However, Emily was not someone easily intimidated. Each time she was pushed, she rose with more determination. She held on to her dignity, refusing to be molded into James's idea of what she should be. Then one night, Emily played her own hand. "James, you think you're in control, don't you? But what you don't know is that I have a plan too, and trust me, when the time comes, you'll see this game is built on something much bigger than anything you could ever imagine." James looked at her, taken aback. For the first time, he realized he might have underestimated Emily, and for the first time, he felt the fear that, in the end, he might not be the one to win this game. The weeks stretched on like a taut rope, each day more tense than the last, ready to snap at any moment. Obsessed with control, James tried every possible way to manipulate the situation in his favor, but Emily persisted, unwavering. She was like a fortress, unbreakable. Every attempt seemed to only strengthen her resolve. But there was something James couldn't deny. As time passed, he began to see Emily in a different light, not just with respect for her resilience, but something deeper. She was doing what no other woman had ever done. She was emotionally defeating him, and that made him feel vulnerable, disoriented. For the first time, he found himself thinking of her not as part of the bet or as an adversary, but as a person he genuinely wanted to understand. One night, after a heated argument, James found himself alone in the expansive living room, looking out at the city through the glass windows. The city lights that once gave him a sense of power now felt hollow. He wondered why he felt this way. Emily was just the woman he married for 6 months. She was supposed to be nothing more than a pawn in his game. But the truth was, she was stirring something inside him. He, who had always controlled his emotions, was now being affected. Emily could see through his mask, and that made him feel exposed. While James wrestled with his thoughts, Emily continued with her routine. She seemed increasingly distant, almost as if she was waiting for something. James felt an invisible wall between them, one he couldn't break, and that unsettled him. He didn't know whether it was pride or the fear of losing control, but there was something about Emily that intrigued him in a way he had never imagined. "She's really different," James said to Mark, his friend, during an impromptu dinner. "Usually, I've got everything under control, but it seems this woman is challenging me in a way no one else ever has." James smiled faintly, unable to respond right away. He hated admitting Mark was right, but it was clear something was changing. That night, James returned home determined to resolve the situation. He needed to get Emily out of his head, remind himself that this was just a contract, nothing more. When he entered the penthouse, he found Emily on the sofa, reading a book, completely unaware of his presence. "Can we talk?" James spoke up, breaking the silence that had become their routine. Emily looked up, calmly closing her book and meeting his gaze with a serene yet attentive expression. "Of course," she replied, as though she had been waiting for this moment all along. James sat across from her, struggling to find the right words. The tension between them was palpable. He knew he couldn't treat this marriage as a mere formality any longer. Something was shifting, and he had to face it. "What are we doing here, Emily?" he asked, the sincerity in his voice surprising even him. "This all started as a game, a bet, but now I don't know what to think anymore." Emily stared at him for a few seconds before responding. "I'm not playing, James. I never was." Her tone was calm, but laden with meaning. "From the beginning, I agreed to this marriage for reasons that go beyond you. I don't care about your money or your control. I'm here for something greater. And if you haven't realized that yet, maybe it's time you opened your eyes." James felt a constriction in his chest, as if she were revealing a secret he still couldn't grasp. Anger overwhelmed him. "I know you have secrets, Emily, but what bothers me is the more I try to understand you, the more I realize I have no control over anything, and I hate that." He suddenly stood up, unable to sit still, as if the weight of her revelations was too much to bear. Emily remained calm, watching his every movement. Slowly, she stood and walked towards him, stopping just a few inches away. James felt his heart race. "James," she began, her voice soft and gentle. "This isn't about control. You've spent your life trying to dominate everything and everyone, but with me, you'll have to learn that control isn't always the answer. Sometimes, things just need to be as they are." James looked into her eyes, and in that moment, he felt a connection he had never experienced before. It was as if he was truly seeing Emily for the first time, not as a pawn in his game. "So, what do you want?" he asked, his voice softer, almost a whisper. Emily smiled, a mysterious grin that sent a chill down his spine. "I want you to figure that out for yourself, James." And with those words, she turned away, leaving him with his thoughts. In the days that followed, the distance between them seemed to grow, but strangely, James felt closer to Emily than ever before. He became obsessed with uncovering what she was hiding, what her true motives were. At the same time, he felt himself losing control. He didn't want to admit it, but Emily was changing the way he saw the world, and the very idea that she could affect him so profoundly terrified him. 6 months into their marriage, and it almost felt like an eternity for James Taylor. He could hardly sleep. The anticipation of what was to come twisted his stomach into knots. Emily had become a mystery in his life. He no longer saw her just as the woman he married as part of a bet, but as someone who knew something he couldn't grasp. The obsession with understanding Emily consumed every thought he had. He had tried every possible way to uncover her secret, but each answer only led to more questions. James hired a private investigator, dug into her past, and followed every lead he could. But it all seemed meticulously planned by Emily. She appeared to always be 2 steps ahead, controlling the game from the very beginning.
One night, after a late work meeting, James returned to the penthouse later than usual. The light from the balcony still burned brightly, and Emily sat, gazing out over the Los Angeles skyline like a queen observing her empire. He knew tonight would be the night when everything would be revealed. James felt she was finally ready to tell him what he had longed to know, but the fear of what he might hear made his throat tighten. He walked toward her, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the quiet room. Emily didn't turn around immediately. The air was heavy, as if they both knew something terrible was about to unfold. "I need answers, Emily," James said, his voice firm, even though his heart raced. "I can't keep playing this game. You need to tell me the truth." Emily sighed, slowly rising from the chair and turning to face him. Her eyes, usually calm and calculating, now held an emotion that James couldn't decipher. There was something new in her, something dark and intense. "The truth?" Emily smirked, crossing her arms. "Do you really want to know the truth?" James nodded without hesitation, but the air between them grew tenser, and with every passing second, his stomach became heavier. He braced himself for any answer, but nothing could prepare him for what was about to come. "You don't understand who I am," Emily began, her voice cold, laced with an icy sharpness. "You've always treated others like pawns in your game, but this time, James, you're the pawn I'm controlling." James felt a shiver run down his spine. The certainty with which he believed he controlled everything began to shatter right in front of her. He tried to speak, but Emily didn't give him the chance. "Do you remember the name Foster?" she continued, her voice growing sharper. "Of course you don't. Men like you never remember. My father owned a small company, one that struggled to survive until you came along and destroyed it." James took a step back, his eyes widening, his mind racing to connect the pieces. "What?" he stammered, unable to comprehend what was happening. "What are you talking about?" Emily took a step toward him, her eyes burning with anger and pain. "My father, James, he was an honest man, working hard to feed our family, until you came and took everything. You destroyed him. He lost everything. And then he died." She paused, her voice catching in her throat, tears welling in her eyes. "My father committed suicide because of your empire, because of your success at any cost." Her words hit James like a punch to the stomach. He stood frozen, memories flooding back all at once. So many deals, so many contracts, so many lives altered by his greedy hands. He couldn't remember every company he'd crushed to rise to the top, but now everything came rushing back to haunt him. "Emily," he tried to interrupt, but she raised her hand to silence him. "No," she shouted, her fury rising. "You have no idea what you've done. It's not just about the money, James. These are lives that have been ruined. You took my father, the only person I had in this world. While you thrived, my mother and I sank into debt and despair. You lived in luxury while we had nothing to eat." James was completely shocked. He wanted to say something to defend himself, but no words came. All he could do was stand there, staring at her, while guilt weighed down on his chest like a stone. "But I planned it all," Emily continued, her voice now softer, but still tinged with resentment. "When I learned about your bet,
I saw an opportunity. I approached you with purpose. I took your bet because I wanted you to feel just a fraction of what I've been through. I wanted you to know what it feels like to be played with, manipulated, and left in hopelessness. James felt his body shake. He had always believed he was the one in control, always thought he would win. But now, the game had turned. He was the target, and Emily was the one pulling the strings. "Emily," James began, his voice weak. I didn't know. I didn't know. You're not—" "No, James," Emily interrupted, stepping closer until she and he were only inches apart. "You never knew, because you never cared. You destroyed lives without a second thought. And now, I'm not here to ruin you. I'm here to make sure you never forget what you've done. I want you to feel the pain you caused. And that pain, James, will haunt you for the rest of your life." Her words landed on James like a verdict, crashing down on him. He was facing something he had never imagined. He had never felt the true consequences of his actions. The guilt weighed on him like a boulder, and in that moment, he knew he had lost more than just a simple bet. He had lost something he could never get back. Emily walked away, her footsteps echoing in the penthouse. James felt his legs give way, collapsing onto the sofa, motionless, without an explanation. All that was left was emptiness. Emily's revelation echoed in James's mind like an endless storm, every word she spoke shattering the world he thought he understood. The woman he thought he could control, the one he had viewed as a pawn in his game of power and bets, had now turned the entire game upside down. For the first time, James didn't know how to react. For the first time, he truly lost control. Emily didn't give him time to think. After dropping the bomb about her family's destruction and her father's death, she left him, alone in the room, abandoned with his own guilt. James stood there, motionless, the air in the penthouse stifling as if everything around him was about to collapse. He wanted to speak to her, apologize, explain the unexplainable, but the truth was, no words came. How could he justify something as cruel as that, something that had caused so much pain? In the days following her revelation, Emily did exactly what James feared most. She completely ignored him. Her presence became a constant reminder of his failure. She passed by him as if he were invisible, as though his existence were nothing more than a shadow. At breakfast, she sat in silence, barely lifting her gaze. When he attempted to speak, his words evaporated into the air, unable to break through the wall she had built between them. James, who was so accustomed to controlling every space, the center of attention in every room, was now abandoned in his own home. The absence of that attention was unbearable. Emily conversed with the staff, handled her personal matters, but with James, it was as if he didn't exist. That oppressive silence slowly eroded the man he thought he was unique. "Emily," he tried to call one morning as she prepared to leave, "we need to talk." She stopped, turned her back to him, adjusting her coat. The silence in the air grew heavier, and James stood there, tense, waiting for some response. Even anger would have been preferable to this indifference. But the truth was, no words came. She simply walked out, closing the door quietly behind her, leaving James alone with the echo of the door in his mind. The sensation of being ignored by someone he had come to see not just as an adversary, but something more, an entirely new feeling for James. He had always been in control, always assumed he would win, but now he was the one being manipulated, punished with silence and contempt. Each time she left him standing alone, the sense of helplessness grew clearer, and this was only the beginning. Emily didn't stop with silence. She began attacking James's confidence in small but painful ways. At the office, he noticed important meetings being delayed with no notice, his business decisions suddenly questioned, and the projects he spearheaded started failing mysteriously. He knew this was Emily's game, though she would never admit it. James felt her influence in every move, as if she were pulling the invisible strings that held his life together. At home, things grew even worse. Emily's absolute disdain was palpable, and she deliberately shut down every attempt James made to reconcile. She no longer sat with him at meals, avoided any conversations beyond mere pleasantries. When he pursued her, desperately trying to mend things, Emily responded with cold stares, as if his very presence was an inconvenience. One evening, James found her in the living room, reading a book. The scene seemed peaceful, but he knew that moment of calm was the trap of silence. He sat on the sofa, once again attempting to speak to her. His voice was soft, almost pleading. "I know I've done awful things. I know how much pain I've caused you, but please, can we try to work this out? At least talk?" Emily slowly closed the book without looking at him. When she finally looked up, her face was so cold that it made him shudder. "Talk?" she repeated with a mocking laugh. "You think there's anything left to say? Do you have words for me, James? After everything you've done, words are meaningless." "I was wrong, Emily. I know that," James said firmly, now standing up, stepping closer, desperately seeking some connection. "I'll do anything to fix what I've done. I can change, I swear." Emily finally met his gaze, her eyes sharp as knives, challenging him to live up to his promises. "Change?" she asked, slowly standing up. "You think change now can undo everything? Can it bring my father back? Can it undo the years we spent in pain because of you? No, James, it can't." She stepped closer, and James felt himself crushed under the weight of her gaze. "What you do now is not for me, it's for you. You'll carry this burden, this guilt, for the rest of your life." James stood still, for the first time realizing that there was no easy redemption, no immediate forgiveness. He wanted to fight for something that could be repaired, but Emily had long since surpassed any simple healing. In the following days, Emily intensified her punishment. James was met with disdainful glances every time he passed her, and his frustration turned to despair. He tried time and again to prove to her that he had changed, that he wanted to be better, but every effort was either ignored or mocked. One night, after a disastrous meeting at the company where an important project was sabotaged, James returned home to find Emily on the phone, laughing. He overheard snippets of the conversation and realized she was discussing his decisions at work. He knew it was her. Emily was systematically destroying everything James had built, but in such a subtle, calculated way that no one but him could see it, and she left him to suffer in silence. When Emily finished her call, James was waiting in the living room. He looked at her, his expression weary, with anger suppressed, but also a deep sense of pain. "You're destroying everything, aren't you?" he said, his voice low but tinged with frustration. "You're destroying my life!" Emily looked at him with a blank expression, arms crossed. "Destroying your life?" She raised an eyebrow. "I'm only giving you back what you've given me. Don't worry, James. I won't ruin you financially. That would be too easy. I want you to live with the pain. I want you to feel every small loss, just like I have. I want you to see everything you've built fall apart every day and know that it's your fault." James felt the ground beneath him vanish once again. It was a nightmare. He had always been the winner, always the one controlling others' destinies, but now he was the target of a cold, meticulous vengeance. Emily didn't want to destroy him all at once. She wanted him to suffer each day, with every small failure, every look of contempt, until he was left with nothing but regret. Weeks went by, and Emily continued to ignore and punish him. James, once proud and confident, now wandered around the house like a shadow of his former self, trying to find ways to earn forgiveness that he knew would never come. He tried to make amends, but every effort fell short. He was trapped in a spiral of guilt and pain, a cycle that Emily controlled with perfection. But the worst was yet to come. One night, Emily finally faced him, this time with a coldness James had never seen before. She walked up to him while he was sitting on the sofa, exhausted and broken, and spoke words that would haunt him forever. "James, you've taken something from me that I can never get back," she began, her tone calm but sharp. "I'm giving you back what you've done, and you'll have to live with it for the rest of your life." With those words, Emily walked away, offering no more explanation. She didn't need to say anything else. The punishment had already begun, and James understood that he would never be the same. James Taylor felt trapped in a maze of guilt and despair. Emily had succeeded in making him experience the loss of control, the sensation of having no power. The weeks after Emily's revelation became unbearable. James was no longer the confident, arrogant man who believed he controlled everything around him. Now, he was just a shadow, a faint image of his former self. Every time he tried to talk to Emily, he was met with cold stares, indifference, and rejection. Her apathy seemed to consume him. He could no longer sleep, could think of nothing but trying to fix what he had broken, but the weight of the truth and his past actions made the path nearly impossible. However, something began to change within James. He realized that his words no longer held any weight. Apologies meant nothing. Emily needed to see real change, a genuine transformation, and he was willing to do whatever it took to prove that to her. He needed to act, not just make empty promises.
One morning, James woke up with a new determination. He knew he couldn't simply ask for forgiveness. He had to do something different. The first step would be to give Emily space. She needed to see that he respected her time, that he would no longer pressure her. But he also knew that he had to show her he was still there, in small but meaningful ways. James began paying attention to the little details that made up Emily's life. He watched her daily routines, her likes, and the things she cherished. He didn't stalk her or invade her privacy, but he took note of everything she loved. Flowers, particularly peonies, the strong smell of her morning coffee, unsweetened. These details, once insignificant, had now become key to his efforts to reconnect. That afternoon, James went to one of the best flower shops in the city and bought a bouquet of peonies. He didn't intend to give it to Emily directly. He knew she would refuse it immediately. Instead, he placed the bouquet on the kitchen dining table with no note, just a simple yet meaningful gesture. He waited anxiously for her to return from her walk. When Emily came back, she noticed the flowers. She didn't say anything, but James watched from the corner of his eye, noting the moment she stopped in front of the bouquet. Her expression didn't change, but he saw her gently pick up a single flower and inhale its fragrance. It was a small gesture, but to James, it was a sign that she hadn't completely dismissed them. It was a step forward. In the days that followed, James continued with these small gestures. He carefully set the breakfast table, made the strong coffee she liked, and left without disturbing her. He placed things she loved within reach, always without forcing a meeting or a conversation. Slowly, he was trying to show that he had changed, that he was paying attention, and that he truly wanted to care for Emily. But Emily still wouldn't let go. She kept the wall firmly between them, and James knew that breaking it down would take time. Still, he didn't give up. He was committed
to showing her that he had changed, that he could win her back, but on her terms, and with the respect she needed for her space. One cold evening, things began to shift. Emily was sitting on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, gazing at the city lights. After a moment's hesitation, James walked over to her. He brought her a hot cup of tea, knowing that she liked something warm before going to bed. "I thought you might like something hot," he said, his tone calm, not forcing his presence on her. Emily didn't say anything at first, but she took the cup. Her eyes remained focused on the distant lights. James stood beside her, silently, just trying to be present without intruding. The silence between them was tense, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't completely suffocating. The feeling wasn't unbearable. It was as if something was shifting, even if only slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Why are you doing this?" Emily finally broke the silence, her voice soft yet firm. James knew this was his opportunity to speak, but he had to be careful. He took a deep breath before responding.
"Because I've realized that words don't matter anymore." He started, his gaze turned toward the horizon with hers. "My words don't mean anything. What I've done can't be fixed with an apology, but I'm trying to show you that I'm changing. I want to be a better person, not just for you, but because I've realized I need to be." Emily remained silent for a moment, still holding the cup of tea. A cold breeze swept over them, but the tension seemed to have eased slightly. "You can't change the past, James," she finally spoke, her voice softer than he had expected. "I know," he replied sincerely, "but I can change the future." Emily looked at him for the first time that evening, and James saw something different in her eyes. There was still hardness, but there was a flicker of curiosity. She wasn't ready to forgive him completely. He understood that. But this was an important moment. He had touched something that perhaps she wanted to believe. In the days that followed, James continued his small gestures, but now there was a different energy between them. Emily still kept her distance, but she no longer rejected him outright. She accepted the flowers, the cups of tea, and even allowed him to talk to her at breakfast, though their conversations remained brief and superficial. The barriers between them began to slowly break down, even if just bit by bit. But the real test came one evening when James was preparing to go out for a meeting. He had dressed, ready for another business appointment, when Emily walked into the room with an unreadable expression on her face. "Can you cancel the meeting?" she asked suddenly. James looked at her surprised. She hadn't shown any interest in where he went or what he did since their relationship had fallen apart. He hesitated, then nodded, grabbing his phone and canceling the meeting without a second thought. This was the first time in weeks that Emily seemed willing to spend time with him, and he wasn't going to miss this opportunity. They sat on the couch, the space between them still there, but for the first time, the silence didn't feel uncomfortable. Emily seemed to be thinking, as though she was processing everything that had happened over the past few months. "I'm not ready to forgive you completely, but you're showing me something different. I see you're trying, and maybe that's the beginning of something." James felt his heart race. He couldn't rush it, he understood that, but Emily's words were enough to keep hope alive within him. He knew the road ahead was still long, but he was willing to take it one step at a time, if that was the way to earn her forgiveness and perhaps her love once more.
That night passed peacefully, with small talk between them, but to James it was a victory. He was slowly building something again with patience. Emily was no longer an unreachable figure. She was beginning to lower her defenses, and James wouldn't make the mistake of taking her for granted. Yet there was still a shadow lingering between them. James knew Emily hadn't revealed everything. She still held something back, and he had to be prepared to face it. But for now, just the fact that Emily was willing to talk was enough.
In the weeks that followed, those quiet evenings were a mix of tension and hope. For the first time in a long while, James felt he was making progress with Emily. She no longer treated him with cold indifference, but she hadn't fully opened up either. There was a hesitation in the air, a kind of waiting that kept him on edge. He knew he was being tested, and he was ready for it. What he didn't know was that something much bigger was about to be revealed. James was putting everything he had into proving to Emily that he had changed. He canceled work commitments to spend more time at home, trying to be present without pushing or demanding immediate answers. Small gestures like making breakfast together or having casual conversations in the evening became part of their routine. Slowly, the ice between them began to thaw, and James noticed Emily no longer treated him with the same contempt as before. However, despite the progress, something still weighed on him. He felt that Emily was hiding a secret. She still kept her distance at certain moments, avoiding deeper conversations about the past or the future. It was as if she was waiting for the right moment to speak, but James didn't know when that would be. Then, on one quiet evening, as rain gently tapped against the windows of their penthouse, James noticed a shift in Emily's demeanor. She seemed more contemplative, more distant than usual, as though she was lost in her own thoughts. He tried not to press her, but the curiosity inside him grew stronger. What was she hiding? What hadn't been said yet? Finally, when the silence became unbearable, James broke through the wall. "Emily," he began, his voice low, almost fearful, "I know there's still something between us that you haven't told me. I can feel it." He looked into her eyes, waiting for any sign of her response. "Please, if there's something you're keeping from me, I need to know." Emily, sitting on the sofa with her hands folded in her lap, took a deep breath, initially avoiding his gaze. The silence that followed was painful, but James knew he had to be patient. He understood that if he pushed now, any progress he had made could be undone. Finally, she looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pain and resolve. "You're right," Emily said, her voice soft but heavy with emotion. "I've been holding something back, something I didn't think I could tell you until now. But maybe it's time." James felt the air around him tighten. Even though he didn't know what it was, he knew that this would change everything. He leaned forward slightly, waiting for the revelation to come, but also fearing what he might hear.
"Do you remember the company you destroyed? The company my father managed?" Emily began, her voice firm, but her face twisted in agony. "I told you that you destroyed our family, and that's true, but that's not all you destroyed." James looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice full of concern. Emily lowered her head, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to fall. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer, almost a whisper. "I was pregnant, James." The words hit James like a heavy blow. He blinked, trying to process what he had just heard, but he couldn't believe his ears. He whispered, almost paralyzed, I can't believe it. I was pregnant when everything happened, and when we lost everything, when my father passed away, the pressure and stress from everything, I lost the baby." James felt the ground beneath him disappear. He could barely breathe. The shock of her words struck him in the gut, something he had never imagined. The guilt that had weighed on him for weeks now felt even heavier. He hadn't just destroyed a company, hadn't just torn apart a family. He had taken away a life. "Emily," his voice caught in his throat, his words barely forming. I can't, I never imagined." She finally met his gaze, and the tears she had held back began to fall, tracing the lines of her face. Despite the pain etched on her features, there was an undeniable strength in her. "No, you wouldn't know, because you never cared enough to know. You destroyed lives, James, and you never once looked at the people who were in your way. I lost the baby, and you just kept living as if nothing happened." Her words sliced through James like a blade. He wanted to say something, anything, to fix what he had broken, but deep down he knew there was nothing he could say or do to erase what Emily had been through. I have no words. At last, James spoke, his voice weak and filled with despair. I know what I did is unforgivable, and I'll never forgive myself for it, but please, Emily, I'll do anything to make it right. Anything. Emily stared at him for what seemed like an eternity, the silence between them almost unbearable. James understood that no words could bring the baby back or fix the past, but he was desperate to find some way, any way, to ease the pain Emily carried.
Finally, Emily took a deep breath, her eyes closing as if she were making a decision in her heart. When she opened her eyes again, her expression had shifted. The pain was still there, but there was something else, something James couldn't quite place. "I don't know if I can forgive you, James," she said, her voice raw and sincere. "What you've done, what happened, it's been a heavy shock." She paused, as though carefully weighing each word. "I see you're trying, and maybe one day I'll find a way to move on. But it won't be easy. It won't be quick." James nodded, feeling a mix of hope and despair. He knew the road ahead would be hard, but at least Emily was willing to consider the possibility of a future, however uncertain. "I'll do whatever it takes," James replied, his voice resolute. "No matter how long it takes, I'll prove to you I've changed, that I can be the man you can trust, the man you might one day forgive." Emily looked at him, and for the first time there was a crack in the coldness of her eyes. It wasn't full forgiveness, nor was it the end of all her pain, but it was a start. "We'll see," Emily sighed softly. "We'll see if you can do it." The silence between them was heavy, yet filled with potential. Emily stood up and moved toward the door, leaving James alone on the sofa. But this time, he didn't feel the same despair as before. He knew the long road ahead would be challenging, but at least now he had hope. The days following Emily's revelation changed James. Every word she had spoken echoed in his mind, pressing on him as he felt the weight of the guilt from all the damage he had caused. But instead of drowning in regret, James decided that the pain and guilt would be his motivation to change. He didn't just want to win Emily's love back, he wanted to become a man worthy of her respect, and the respect of those he had hurt throughout his ruthless business career. That morning, James made a decision. He would not remain paralyzed by the past. He would start over, and the first step was to repair as much of the damage as he could to show Emily that he had truly changed. He began reaching out to the families whose lives had been destroyed by his business deals. His first meeting was with the family of a former competitor whose company he had bankrupted years ago. He showed up unannounced, knocking on the door of a modest home far removed from the luxury of his own life. The man who answered the door didn't recognize James, but the pain in his eyes was all too familiar. "I'm James Taylor," James said, his voice filled with sincerity he hadn't known he was capable of. "I've come to apologize." The man stared at him for a long time, disbelief clear in his eyes.
"Apologize?" He laughed bitterly. "What good will an apology do?" "I can't change the past," James replied firmly, "but I can try to help rebuild the future. I'm here to make amends, to fix what I've destroyed." Over the next several weeks, James continued his journey of redemption. He knocked on doors, met with families, and not only offered money, but also time and effort to truly understand the impact his actions had caused. He began donating large sums to small businesses harmed by his corporate manipulations, setting up recovery programs to help other entrepreneurs rebuild their lives. Emily observed from a distance, her gaze cautious at first, watching James' every move. She knew he was trying to change, but forgiveness was never easily granted. Yet, as time passed and James proved his genuine transformation, she began to feel something new towards him, a revived sense of respect and admiration. She hadn't expected him to change, and he had shown that his words were no longer hollow. One evening, as Emily stood on the balcony, her eyes scanning the city lights, James quietly approached her. He had just returned from one of his reconciliation visits, and his expression was markedly different, calmer, more resolute. "How was today?" Emily asked, still gazing toward the horizon. James sighed, a deep breath that carried months of effort and regret. "Tough," he admitted, "but necessary. Every conversation, every apology is a step toward becoming a better person. Not just for you, Emily, but for myself." Finally, Emily turned to face him, and in her gaze there was something different. The hardness she had always held, the anger that lingered in her heart, seemed to soften. In that moment, she realized that James had truly changed. He was no longer the arrogant man who had entered her life with a wager. He was someone fighting to be a different person, someone willing to fight for them. "I can see that, James," Emily said, her voice gentle yet firm. "And I want you to know that I'm willing to try. Perhaps it's time for us to leave the past behind and build something new." James felt a wave of relief, one he hadn't realized he had been waiting for. Her words meant more than he could have imagined. Emily was willing to give them a chance, not as a couple bound by a bet, but as two people ready to start anew. As their 6-month marriage contract neared its end, something unexpected began to happen. Emily and James grew closer. Their conversations became less formal, less tense. They shared moments of laughter and connection, and slowly, love began to blossom in a way neither of them had anticipated. They were no longer a couple of strangers tied together by an arranged marriage, but two people rediscovering each other in a sincere, genuine way.
One evening, as the 6-month period drew to a close, James prepared a special dinner. He knew this moment would be crucial. They had come so far, and he didn't want their marriage to end here. "Emily," he said during dinner, his voice carrying an unexpected tremor of anxiety, "I know our contract is about to expire, but I don't want it to end here. I don't want us to end. I love you, Emily, truly, and I want us to continue, but this time as a real couple, not as a bet, not as a game." Emily looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his words, but also feeling her heart warm. She realized that she too had developed feelings for him, something that had quietly grown over the past weeks. They had started as opponents, but now they loved each other in a deep and real way. "I love you too, James," Emily said, her voice soft but resolute. "And I want to try. I want to build something with you, but this time we are equals, like a real couple." Those moments were pure happiness for both of them. They had overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges, and now they were ready to move forward together. A few months later, Emily began to feel something different in her body. She felt nauseous every morning, something she had never experienced before. At first, she thought it was just stress, or maybe a mild illness, but as it continued, it didn't feel like the usual discomfort. Especially as her body began to tire more easily, she couldn't concentrate on work like she used to. One morning, after breakfast, the nausea returned more strongly than ever. She leaned against the windowsill, staring outside, but unable to shake the strange feeling. It wasn't just a symptom, it felt like a sign of something. She suddenly thought of what could be happening. She decided to visit the doctor to be sure. The result from the examination was something Emily had never expected. When the doctor told her that she was pregnant, a wave of emotions surged within her. She stood there, clutching the test results, her mind spinning. Part of her couldn't believe it, but another part felt it was something so incredibly natural. She was carrying a tiny life, and in that moment, everything seemed to change. When Emily arrived home, she stood before the door, uncertain of how to tell James. Her heart raced, emotions swirling within her. She knew this would be significant news, a turning point in their lives. James was in the living room, and when he heard the door open, he looked up. As soon as he saw her, he noticed the unfamiliar expression on her face, her eyes bright as if there was something unsaid. Emily stepped closer, her mind overwhelmed with complicated thoughts. She took a deep breath and looked directly into James' eyes. "Can you sit down for a moment?" Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly.
James sensed something was wrong, but nodded, sitting beside her. He took her hand in his, concern etched on his face. "What's going on, Emily?" he asked, his expression full of worry. Emily sat in silence for a moment, staring at her hands. Then, unexpectedly, she looked up, her eyes shining. "James, I'm pregnant." The moment Emily shared her news, James' response was one of pure joy. He leapt up, embracing her, tears of happiness mixed with laughter. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion, as if struggling to believe the words. Emily nodded, her smile gentle and soothing. "I know, it's a surprise, but the doctor confirmed it." James couldn't contain his emotions. He hugged her tightly, tears of joy streaming down his face. All the pain and sorrow they had endured seemed to have led to this moment of renewal. They were ready to start a new life together with a little one on the way. "I want to do this right this time," James said, fully aware of what needed to be done. "I want to marry you again, but this time for real, not because of a bet, not for any reason other than that I love you and want to be with you for the rest of my life." Emily smiled, her tears of happiness mingling with his. "I want that too, James. This time it will be a real wedding, a new beginning." Their new wedding was a small, intimate ceremony with just a few close friends and family. There were no grand displays, no rush from work or a wager, just Emily and James, reunited by true love, ready to face the future together. James knew he still had much to prove, not just to Emily, but also to himself and the families he had hurt in the past. But now he had something to fight for, a new life with the woman he loved and the child they were about to welcome. And this time, he was determined to be the man Emily deserved and the father their child needed. As they danced gently at the end of the ceremony, Emily rested her head on James' chest and whispered, "Who would have thought this all started with a bet?" James smiled, holding her tight. "Who would have thought it would turn out to be the best bet I ever made?" With a future full of love, redemption, and hope, they were ready for the next chapter of their lives.
This story illustrates the power of change and second chances in love. What do you think of Emily and James' journey? Would you open your heart to forgive and give someone a chance to change, as Emily did? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice could inspire others and restore faith in the possibility of change. If you found this story touching, don't hesitate to share it with your friends and loved ones, spreading the message of love, forgiveness, and hope. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.